Alright, hello everyone. So, my name's Nicholas Wyrwas, and today I will be presenting the Green Pace Security Policy. Essentially, this presentation will go over and explain in detail our policies, our coding standards, as well as the security principles, while also outlining how we would essentially maintain a strong defense in depth strategy. If there are any questions after the video, please leave a comment, as I always love having feedback given, as well as being given the chance to answer any sort of questions. So, to start off this presentation uh, with our overview and going over defense in depth, we would like to keep the same standard secure development practices while maintaining a good defense in-depth strategy, as well as standardizing most of the coding principles. In talking about these points, we would like to essentially reiterate and discuss how this security policy was written to help maintain and ensure all GreenPace developers follow a standard secure development practice. We want to make sure that as this development team were to expand, get bigger, we get more traction with more teams working on this project, and essentially holding this document close as it keeps all parties aligned with its standards. Meaning it supports a defense in depth strategy primarily by layering multiple protections across our software and systems, and with the multiple teams, allowing everybody to be on the same page essentially, and kind of mitigate any sort of confusion and things like that. So, with slide 3, going over the threats matrix, this matrix essentially lists most severe and most likely coding risks, ranked by severity, probability, as well as cost. And some of the items highlighted has int 31C and a string or str 32C, um, silent logic corruption and buffer overread, and then MEM54 CPP, which would be memory corruption, have the potential to escalate any given bug to an exploitable condition. MSC32C and MSC50 CPP guard against weak randomness or seeding that could lead to predictable tokens. FIO 42C is used to eliminate resource leaks and ensure system reliability and data integrity. EXP05C is used to protect against fragile assertions by using real input validation instead. ERR51 CPP is used to require catch-all handling to prevent catastrophic termination. CON37C is used to eliminate unsafe use of signals in multiple threaded programs. DCL51 CPP is used to eliminate reserved identifier collisions. The coding checks will be enforced by warnings from compilers, static analysis tools such as Coverity, Code Sonar, Ashtree, as well as unit tests for boundary conditions and failure paths. And then on this slide, these 10 core principles form the basis of this policy. A given principle may be reflected by one or more coding standards. So, for instance, validating input data is reflected in INT31C and STR32C. Defense in depth is reflected in each one of them. And then this would allow us to demonstrate that each and every decision in our policy can be related back to one of the best accepted principles. And if we go to the next slide, here we start talking about our coding standards. So here we order the standards by impact as well as exploitability using the risk values from our threat matrix. So tier 1, or like the highest risk, would be in 31C, STR 32C, MEM 54 CPP, essentially because it will harden the most catastrophic classes, which are integer corruption, string overreads, as well as memory misuse. Tier 2, which is our medium risk, um, goes over MSC 32C, XP 05C, FIO 42C to essentially eliminate predictable randomness, replace any brittle assertions with actual validation, and resource leaks. And then finally, tier 3, which would be our lower risk, would be ERR 51 CPP, CON 37C, DCL 51 CPP, and MSC 50 CPP to help with hardened reliability and portability. This prioritization scheme allows us to prevent the highest probability, highest severity failures first, while continually increasing our baseline security posture. And then now we go over our encryption policies. So, our encryption policy protects data at rest, in flight, as well as in use. We would use AES 256 for data at rest. For data in flight, we would employ TLS or IP security for encrypted communications. To protect data in use, so we use secure enclaves and new encryption in use solutions to protect sensitive information while it's being processed. When layered together, these solutions can close gaps throughout the data lifecycle. And then for the AAA policies, um, access control can be enforced with a 3A model. So, authentication essentially limits access to the system to trusted users only. Authorization enforces least privilege access by only giving users the minimum level of access they require. And then finally, accounting provides tamper proof logs for audit compliance, investigations, as well as system monitoring. And then when it comes to the automation summary, essentially automation is one of the key enablers of our security policy. To enforce our security policy, we have automated many security checks, integrated them into the DevSecOps pipeline. This ensures that vulnerabilities are cut as early as possible and with maximum coverage across all builds, creating a repeatable and scalable way to ensure compliance without adding friction. At the compiler level, essentially, Clang is configured to emit strict warning flags to detect unsafe language features or practices, such as reserved identifiers and implicit type conversions. Further along the pipeline, static analysis tools like, for example, Code Sonar, Coverity, Excivian, and CPP check scan the code base for memory corruption, and buffer overflows, and common string handling issues. So that kind of like that STR32C and MEM54 CPP. And for more in-depth analysis, we would use formal verification tools like Ashtree and Eclair to perform path-sensitive checks and assist in validating rules like in 31C and EXP05C, where logical errors may not manifest during normal testing scenarios. And kind of all of the above tools are integrated directly into the CI/CD process. So every code commit is automatically scanned, tested, and validated before it can be merged. Automation is also used post compilation. So unit tests are triggered and dependency scans are essentially run on third party libraries and modules. Build artifacts are then validated before being deployed to target environments. And by essentially automating at various stages of the SDLC, from coding, compilation, and unit tests to deployment, we not only reduce the possibility of human error, but also make security enforcement continuous. So, at the compiler level, Clang warnings are used to essentially detect issues with the reserved identifiers and unsafe macros. So, static analysis tools like Code Sonar, Coverity, Excivian, they can identify problems like buffer overflows, use of initialized memory, or essentially erroneous integer casts. Formal analysis tools like Ashtree, Eclair provide the ability to check more deeply into the code for rules like int31C or exp05C in a path sensitive manner. Tools are automatically executed during the CI/CD builds so that these vulnerabilities can be found and addressed before code is merged. And unit tests and regression tests are executed as part of the pipeline that also check many of the standards such as string termination and integer handling. Automating these tools and checks means Greenpeace can provide consistent application of the security policy without burdening any of their developers. And security is part of the normal build process. So, risks and benefits. So, with int31C, which is integer conversion error, and STR32C, which is string termination, and MEM54 CPP being a memory protection failure. The benefit is that we avoid serious issues like data corruption, buffer overread, memory exploits, which can be immediately weaponized by an attacker. The risk, if not addressed, is that the software can crash and burn during execution, and it can corrupt or leak data or expose entry points for attackers. MSC32C, which is predictable random seeds, EXP05C, assertions used incorrectly or redundantly. The benefit of fixing them in the near term is that we can cause system failures, but more often they're used in conjunction with other lower and medium level flaws to mount a more serious attack. The risk or cost of not doing so is that the medium and low level issues often do not get exposed by static analysis tools, as well as they can go undetected while being exploited. Thus, response time and cost can be high. Next would be ERR 51 CPP, which is unhandled exception, CON 37C, which is unsafe signal handling, and DCL 51 CPP, reserved identifiers. These are generally not issues that lead to a system break-in, but do not impact system reliability, maintainability, as well as scalability. The benefit is that by fixing the low level ones, we ensure that our code is portable and will continue to scale as the number of people working on the code increase. The risk of or cost of not doing so is that the cost benefit analysis, the work involved in fixing them, is deferred to a later time and becomes an increasing liability over time, um, resulting in technical debt. Thus, the benefit cost to fix is high. And for example, I would order these in a descending risk priority, where essentially our high risk vulnerabilities are solved essentially immediately. Medium vulnerabilities are fixed in the near term, and then our low vulnerabilities are handled during a refactor. And for recommendations, my suggestions are centered around four core principles. Firstly, being dependencies. Dependencies should be under constant surveillance, given that a majority of the security flaws can be traced back to libraries in use by a system. It is recommended that there are automated dependency scanners in place which can identify packages which are essentially out of date or vulnerable prior to their deployment in production. Secondly, there needs to be improvements with respect to how Greenpeace manages the vulnerabilities in their software attack or software stack. This includes a focus on core coding practices such as integer safety, string safety, and memory safety, as well as putting a remediation framework in place, which would help guarantee that all the vulnerabilities which have been identified and assigned have been patched by a specific deadline. Thirdly, better encryption methodologies should be put in place, although encryption in rest, in flight, and in use are well covered aspects. We can include more stringent key management and data loss prevention strategies, which can alert in the event of malicious access to sensitive data being attempted. And finally, implementation of at least uh, our implementation of the principle of least privilege can significantly help mitigate insider threats as well as incidental or accidental abuse. Application of this principle on both users as well as system processes would essentially ensure that permissions are only granted at a level that is required for each, thus limiting the damage that can be caused by loss of control. And uh, these suggestions are primarily supposed to aim to provide both short term as well as long term approaches, which should help Greenpeace in its journey to maturity in the domain of cybersecurity, while not losing sight of adaptability to new threats as they essentially emerge. And for our conclusion, when it comes to the Green Pay security policy, sections that could benefit from enhancement or additional clarity, we have concurrency management in software projects. So, while the Green Pace policy provides guidelines on secure coding practices, including handling data in multiple threaded environments, there is a need for more explicit directives on concurrency management. This includes ensuring thread safety and managing concurrent processes effectively, exception and error handling. The process or policy emphasizes robust exception and error handling to prevent security vulnerabilities. However, specific requirements or standards for implementing these practices can be more detailed to ensure comprehensive coverage, monitoring and controlling third party dependencies. The Green Pace policy addresses the risks associated with third party dependencies and the need for careful monitoring and control. Additional guidance on implementing these controls effectively include the use of automated scanning tools, essentially would strengthen this aspect. And then for proactive measures to prevent issues, implementing additional concurrency control standards, adopting more stringent concurrency control measures, such as the specific standard CON 37C, which mandates the elimination of data races in multiple threaded environments. This will enhance the thread safety of GreenPace applications, enhancing secure memory management practices. We would strengthen secure memory management by incorporating practices such as those specified in MEM 54 CPP. These practices include using the most current secure memory handling functions available in the C++ standard library to mitigate vulnerabilities, and then adopting automated dependency scanning tools would implement automated scanning tools that can identify known vulnerabilities in third party libraries and components before they are integrated into the production environment. This proactive measure will help in maintaining the security integrity of GreenPay software. And finally, our last slide, we have our references where I use CertC and C++ secure coding standards, which influenced our coding rules. NIST 800-53, which outlined our control baselines, OAuth's security coding practices for input-output, and data validation principles, and then Microsoft's DevSecOps documentation, which demonstrates the role of automation in our processes, as well as ISO IEC 27001, the standard that frames our information security management approach. And like I said, if anybody has any questions, please leave a comment um, after watching the video, or even if you have any sort of feedback, please let me know. Like I said, any sort of feedback helps me out in the long run, as well as I'll try my best to answer any sort of questions in a timely manner. Thank you.